Okay, this is Run for Your Life lesson 8. The title today is Nervous Control of Breathing. What we're hoping to get out of today's video are these things. For A and A star, we're looking at explaining how breathing rate is controlled by the nervous system. For B, it's interpreting a spirometer trace and understanding what the waves on that mean. For C grade, it's some definitions, so some new terms for you, knowing what tidal volume, residual volume, vital capacity, forced expiratory volume, forced inspiratory volume and minute ventilation are. First of all though, we're going to cover something that we didn't quite touch on last week, which is the nervous control of heart rate. So we looked at the cardiac cycle, if you recall, and we looked at how the heart brings about the cardiac cycle. And what I was saying to you is that the SAN, the sinoatrial node, is under nervous control. Although it will just depolarize of its own accord, the nervous system does have an influence on it. So to explain that, have a look here. Your nervous system can be divided into two parts. You've got the CNS, your central nervous system, and the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. The PNS then we can divide down further into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Now the somatic nervous system, you don't have any, so you have control over. That's the bit where you choose. So that's controlling your skeletal muscle and so on. All the things where you have a choice over what it does and you control it. The autonomic nervous system, well, hence the auto part really. It does things by itself. It's not under your control. So some examples: your breathing rate, your heart rate, digestion, so on. You don't necessarily have control over that. It does it for you. You can obviously monitor and change your breathing rate. You're probably starting to get conscious about it now and thinking about it, and once you do start thinking about your breathing rate, it'll alter. Your heart rate won't necessarily, although some people do think they can alter their heart rate by meditation and so on. But these are all automatic things that happen, and they're under the control of your autonomic nervous system. You can divide the autonomic nervous system down further into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system deals with speeding things up. So things that speed up are caused by the sympathetic nervous system. Things that slow down are caused by the parasympathetic. So if your heart rate was to increase, the sympathetic nervous system will cause that. If it was to decrease, that would be the action of the parasympathetic nervous system. The way to remember it is to think of a parachute. Let me see, test my drawing skills. Something like this. Yeah, he's on a ball. Okay, what do parachutes do? Well, they go down, don't they? So the parasympathetic nervous system slows things down, it brings things down. I suppose if you drop the parachute out the back of a car, like a dragster or something like that, it slows it down. So parachutes slow things down, they bring things down. So your parasympathetic nervous system will slow your heart rate down, it'll slow your breathing rate down, and so on. Okay, in the medulla of the brain you've got a region that's responsible for controlling that. It's called the cardiovascular system. Sorry, the cardiovascular control centre. Okay, and it's going to control your breathing rate. It's going to, sorry, not your breathing rate. It's going to control your heart rate and a number of other things as well. You've got nerves that run directly from that to the sinoatrial node. The sympathetic nerve, as I said, that's going to speed things up. And all you need to know, the only name you need for that is that it's called a sympathetic nerve. The parasympathetic nerve, which is going to slow things down, has a key name. It's called the vagus nerve. Not like Las Vegas. It's spelled differently, so capital V-A-G-U-S. That's going to slow down your heart rate. So how that works, basically the cardiovascular centre's constantly been giving information from your body about the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen that there is in your blood, the temperature of your blood, how much pressure it's under, and also the activity of your muscles. So when your muscles start working, when you start running, that feeds back to the cardiovascular centre, and it starts to respond to those actions, and it'll increase your heart rate, increase your breathing rate accordingly. Quick look at the diagram. So obviously your brain, here you got your cardiac control centre inside the medulla. On here they've called it the accelerator nerve. What were we calling it? Do you remember? On the decelerator nerve, have a think about it. This one, vagus, going to slow things down, so that's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, if you remember. and the accelerator from your sympathetic nervous system. Then you've got your SAN here. If you remember, just a recap from last week, that's going to send your signals, your depolarization across your atria. Got the insulating band here, the AVN here, and then the Purkinje fibres and the bundle of His are going to carry that depolarization down to the apex of the heart here, and then it's going to contract from the bottom up. Okay, so for today's lesson, then we're looking at breathing. Breathing rate, like your heart rate, your nervous system is under control of that, and your parasympathetic nervous system is going to slow that down. Sympathetic will speed it up. And one of the key practicals for this unit is to use a spirometer to measure lung volumes. Now, we haven't got a spirometer in school, so we can't necessarily do it, but I'll show you what a spirometer is on the next slide and what the traces look like, and that's what you're most likely to be asked about, the safety aspects and what the trace means. So we'll have a quick look at that now. So here's a spirometer. The subject here will be attached to a mouthpiece, much like what you saw in the last lesson when we're looking at VO2 max. He's going to have a nose clip on, and the mouthpiece obviously to breathe through. This is connected through here and goes into a cylinder like this. Now, people always think this seems bizarre, but what you've got is water within this tube. So whatever this vessel looks like, there's water in there. And there's another example of a spirometer in your book, by the way. But you've got water in there, and you've got this vessel here, that vessel there. That's a terrible arrow. But that vessel there is floating on this water. So what happens if you breathe in, you take air out of this system, it's going to be less buoyant. This thing here, this vessel is going to be less buoyant. There's less air in it, so it's going to float less. So it's going to sink. It's going to go down. When you breathe out and you put water back, so you put air back into the system, it's going to go up. Does that make sense? So you breathe in, the cylinder goes down. You breathe out, the cylinder goes up. And so what you get, if you look how it's attached here, you've got this drum here. This is a rotating drum, so it spins around, and it's got graph paper on it effectively. There's a pen there, and the pen is going to draw the trace onto the rotating graph paper as this cylinder goes up and down. And what you therefore get is a graph that looks something like this. What you'll get on the graph is something like this. So if you look at this part here, it's what we call our tidal volume. So that's our normal breathing in and out. So you attach to the spirometer, you're normally breathing in and out. So remember, this goes down when you're breathing in. So this part there, they're breathing in. This part there, they're breathing out. Because the vessel's going to be more buoyant and it's going to float up, and so the pen is going to go up. What you've got here, the inspiratory reserve volume, they've taken in the deepest breath they can. So there's normal breathing, tidal volume, then they breathe in as deep as they can, like that, and then what they're doing is they're breathing out as much as they can to get the forced expiratory volume. Okay, so that's this part here. So in as much as they can, breathe out as much as they can, and this is the trace that you get. That overall is called the vital capacity. So inspiratory plus expiratory reserve plus tidal volume will give you a vital capacity. There's also some left over. There's always air left in your lungs. If it wasn't there, your lungs will collapse. So it needs to be in there to maintain their shape, and that's called the residual volume that's left over. Add all of those together and you get your total lung capacity, which is the vital capacity in most people is between like 3 and 4 litres, but people who are particularly big or people who are trained athletes often have vital capacities of about 5 litres, sometimes longer, sometimes larger. It very much depends on the size of your chest, really. The bigger your chest, the bigger your lungs, the bigger your lung capacity is going to be. And training doesn't necessarily improve your lung capacities, it more trains your body's ability to take on oxygen and use it, which was your VO2 max that we talked about last week. Okay, so how's breathing controlled? Well, what you've got is something called the ventilation centre. Now it's found in the medulla oblongata. I'll show you where that is shortly in your brain, and it controls ventilation again by sending signals to the respiratory muscles. So you've got your the muscles, so your diaphragm, your intercostals, and also your neck and your chest. So during inhalation, I said here, your ventilation centre is going to send signals to your external intercostals and your diaphragm. That's going to cause your chest to go up and out as you breathe in. Also, if you're breathing in, heavily and as much as you can, your neck, like I said, and your chest might well be employed in order to give you that big breath. As they're inflating, you've got stretch receptors within your lungs and your alveoli, which are then going to send signals back to the ventilation centre. That's going to stop inhalation, so you don't overinflate your lungs. When you exhale, the lungs deflate. It doesn't take any energy. It happens on its own. And try it. Take a deep breath in, hold it, and then just let it go. Your body doesn't have to do anything necessarily to force the air out. It's because the lungs are elastic. The alveoli are covered in elastic tissue. They recoil naturally and force air out. Your internal intercostals can help that, but they generally only do it again when you're really trying hard to exhale, so possibly during exercise and so on. If you've heard of a disorder called emphysema, that's caused by smoking and inhalation. Well, often miners have it because of the inhalation of the particulates down the mine, and that damages the elastic tissue in their lungs, so their alveoli no longer recoil, so it becomes very, very difficult to breathe out. So they tend to have very short breaths because they don't recoil like they should do. So your breathing rate is controlled by the ventilation centre, and actually the thing that affects your rate of breathing the most is the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, or the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. The reason behind that is basically carbon dioxide, when you've got a lot of it, it will dissolve in the blood plasma, forming something called carbonic acid. And it often will dissociate into hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbon ions. That ultimately lowers the pH of the blood, so it makes the blood more acidic. Now you've got what's called chemoreceptors, which detect chemicals in the blood. You've got them in the ventilation centre, and they're going to detect the increase in hydrogen ions because it's become more acidic, and that's going to send messages to the rest of the ventilation centre saying, we've got a lot of carbon dioxide here, we need to breathe more deeply, and we need to breathe faster, and so that would increase your breathing rate and overall ventilation rate. That's important because obviously if you're exercising, you're going to be producing more carbon dioxide and you need to get rid of it, so you need to breathe deeper and more regularly. There's quite a lot of information there, so if you want to pause it, jot that down maybe, there's quite a few new key terms in there to have a look at. The effect of what we talked about in the last slide is ultimately that you get a large concentration gradient in the alveoli. Because you're ventilating your lungs more regularly, the carbon dioxide concentration in the alveoli compared to that of the blood is quite a big difference, a big concentration gradient if you remember diffusion, and so more carbon dioxide moves out of the blood into the lungs and is breathed out. As I was saying earlier, your exercise is going to affect your breathing rate again because impulses from the motor cortex, which is the part of your brain that controls all your movement, and stretch receptors in your muscles and tendons and so on, they will act on the ventilation centre too. They'll feed into it and say, my body's exercising, it's moving, it's going to need more oxygen, we need to start breathing deeper and more regularly.